So my name is Plante. I'm the head of product strategy at SoFi. I sit across most of the lending products, but as we expand into more relationship products, money, wealth, and anything else we've got in the pipeline, working more towards like having a consistent relationship with the customer instead of like a transactional relationship. So this is a little bit of the SoFi origin story that Anna spoke about before. Student loan debt, like I went to business school. I think many people in this room probably went to graduate school for engineering degrees or business degrees. I saw like a Haas shirt. I think I saw a Booth sweater. So I see there's a few people out there also. But many people have student debt. And SoFi came up with a way basically to refinance people in a way to save them $20,000 about on average. But that industry, we made a lot of money in it. And what happened was all of a sudden, you have a good idea, other people start coming into the space. It's just like anything else. So we had to start innovating and thinking, well, how can we leverage the brand that we have today to be able to go on to the next big product, the next big thing. And so there's a few ways of doing this. You can kind of go out horizontally, right? And you can look at other lending, which is what we did at first with our personal loan product. So we had student loans, then you go into personal loans, which is basically a consumer loan to use money to do essentially whatever you want with. There's other products that would be like, home equity lines of credit could be an example, or a secure loan against your house. There's a lot of different verticals. There's a lot of different opportunities going horizontally, and also you can look at more vertical strategy where you're thinking, inside of student loans, like you can kind of carve out, like you can expand it that way. So it's not just people with graduate degrees. You can look at people who may not meet your initial box, and you can change your program to meet your customers' need, right? So you can change your product to expand to meet people, or change the way you're doing what you're doing now to meet new customers in the different groups. So I like to think of things as being able to do, hopefully the sweet spot's to do both. You get new customer groups and do what you want to do better, but there's two paths to go forward. So the example I'm going to walk through now is when we went to change things going in a vertical strategy, we're going to target doctors, basically. So if everyone knows, so I didn't know this when I started designing the product, so I'm going to assume many people in this room don't know it either. But to become a doctor in the United States, you go to college for 4 years. But very often you go to medical school for 4 years, and you graduate and you're now a doctor. But you're not licensed to practice anywhere until you go through what's called a residency. And very often you do a fellowship, which is basically like a specialty. So you graduate from med school. On average, by then, you've been in college for 4 years, med school for 4 years, and the clock is ticking on your student loan debt the entire time. So even though you're not paying on it, and this happened to all of you, if any of you guys borrowed money to go to school, the interest was accruing while you're in school, which means essentially you owe a lot more money at the end than you even borrowed. So you borrow 50, the way interest accrues, you might owe 75 at the end. And for doctors who are in school for 8 years, the numbers are more like you borrowed 150 and you owe 250 because you've been in school forever. And if you take if you go through your residency program, which is 3 or 4 years usually, then the clock often keeps running because you go to deferment, because as a resident, you're basically an intern. And when you're an intern, you're making less money than you're making as like a full-time professional. Okay, so that's how the residency works. Then you graduate, you make all this money as a doctor. So we had so many students coming in, or people who just finished med school applying for loans but wouldn't qualify because a resident makes $60,000 a year, whereas a doctor makes $500,000 a year, whatever it is, for depending on your specialty. So we started to design a program to decide how we can best get to them. So this one's basically how doctors work. How banks think of doctors today, though, is very much driven by their cash flow. And this applies to student loans, it applies to mortgages, it applies to anything. And doctors aren't the only ones, like dentists. A lawyer, if you're clerking is a lawyer, it's the same exact idea. If you're a pharmacist, like people with graduate degrees who are interning for a couple of years, which is not an uncommon thing, like they get looked at as if they're only going to be making that much money forever. And so what we did was a tremendous amount of research to figure out how much we think these guys are going to be making, right? And so so we did this math, and I'll be wrong as often as I was right, but on aggregate, we'll be pretty close. And so you can basically model out essentially how they're going to be earning in the future. And so if you have enough people, you can say, we're going to lend all of this money out, and yeah, I'll probably be wrong a few times, probably by a lot, but in general, it's going to work out fine. We'll make some conservative assumptions, and we'll be able to accurately predict people's incomes going forward, which will allow us to price their loans at a much more competitive rate. Because the way the SoFi underwriting and most underwriting models these days work is it's a combination of your credit score, so your FICO, which everyone in this room probably has, which like grows a scale from 450 to 850, where you can get basically the higher score the better, and the amount of free cash flow you have. So you make, as a doctor, $60,000, as a resident, $60,000, but like I live in New York, you live on the Upper East Side, or you live in, what's a fancy part of town in San Francisco, like Nob Hill. You live in Nob Hill because you are going to be a doctor and you want to have all this like fancy stuff. And so you live in this nice apartment with your fellow resident, or maybe your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your husband or your wife or just your buddy, and you're living in like you would call it squalor, but you're doing fine because you're making not much money. But your loan payments would be $2,000 plus a month if you were paying the full frame, like the full loan payment. You can't afford that. So what we did was come up with a program thinking about like the doctor specifically. Did I skip one? Okay. So it's thinking specifically in mind, right? We talked about this already, so let's skip this one. Well, I guess this 5 seconds to talk about this. So there are a couple programs for doctors specifically that we are kind of like competing with for the government. Essentially, like you're able to. Can you guys all hear me in the back? So essentially, we compete with the government to say you don't have to go into deferment and have this interest rate keep piling up on you. The government programs will say, we will base your payments on your income. Like, so you don't make as much money, so you don't pay as much, and we'll forgive at the end. But if you go into private practice later, they basically say, actually forget all of that, you owe us all this money. So it's a good program if you stay in public service, but if you don't, if you go into private practice, which about 50% of doctors do, and about 98% of dentists do, the program's going to work for you. The program's really designed for teachers who don't have a lot of money and they have debt from school, from undergrad. But doctors are eligible for it too, just like everybody else. And so what we designed is a program that kind of takes the best practices of what they came up with, which is the reduced payment while they're in the residency program, but also the benefits of the refinance at a lower rate down the road. Okay. And so this is the part where like the product team and I worked very closely together, where we had to figure out like, the first part is basically me, like what's like the strategy, how's this going to look, great. The second thing is like, how do we design the product in a way that we can get it to market as quickly as possible, right? Because once you have a good idea, the same thing happened with student loans, eventually people are going to realize we're making all this money in it, and they're going to roll into it too, right? So we need to be able to hit the ground running with a product that works for us. And then how do we make it work in terms of our operations? So at SoFi and at most lenders, a person who at SoFi, probably sitting in Salt Lake City, actually looks at your documents on a screen, not paper anymore, thank God. And they will go through and say, okay, this looks about right, we'll do it, sounds good. So, but there's a tremendous amount of change because the way they're calculating everything is different now. And so Wilson, who was the product manager I worked with on this, we went to Salt Lake City and Montana, where our engineers sit, to figure out exactly like how do we communicate this initiative across the organization so they understand what it's all about. So I became an expert in medicine education. Wilson is also one, and we had to explain why this even mattered, right? Because people say, these are doctors, they're making all this money. What do they need a $100 per month payment for? Like they're making twice what I'm making. What do they need this for? And so you have to explain how it works, right? So being able, and this is the take home for you guys, I think, is like any product you're building or anything you're designing, the more you understand about it, the better. And if you're working with the business people, like someone like me on your side, like in the product side or engineering side, find that person and ask them like what the real impact is. So Jimmy's sitting in the back there. That's Jimmy. Jimmy's waving. So Jimmy is one of our lead engineers for our what we call our operator system, which is the system that has to make this all work. So we can come up with these great products, but if the operators can actually make them function, it doesn't work. So very often I'll send Preetham, the product manager, or Wilson, whoever we worked with this, like the slides I've used to get the credit committee that have gone to the CEO to say this is why we're going to do this initiative. So Jimmy can talk to his team about why this matters. So like the more you understand, like there's questions that I can't anticipate you'll have, right? And there's questions that Jimmy's going to have that he doesn't know he needs to come in for. So the more information that can be shared between the business and the product and the engineering folks, the better you'll be able to anticipate issues down the road, which means when you roll out the product, you'll have fewer like hiccups, which we had a few in this one, and you'll have a better, more seamless process because they understand what you're trying to get to, the end result, right? So this is something that we learned a lot in the medical resident program. Was we had, we did this like road show essentially across the organization to get people to understand what we were trying to build and like how and why it mattered. Okay, so the program design basically was, we thought like as a resident. So I spoke to a lot of my friends, and a bunch of my friends actually ended up refinancing with SoFi's program, which is great because I helped them save like $40,000. Like I went to their wedding and I gave them $300 or whatever. But I tell them I send a link to this website and they save a couple basis points off their loan, and also $45,000 because their wife is is a resident at Brown, right? These are the kind of things that you have a huge impact. And at SoFi, like I kid with some of the other teams, like Aaron's sitting here, like Aaron, I kid with Aaron all the time. Like Aaron, like when we solve a problem, Aaron's a product manager on the device team. So when we solve these problems, like it's a $10 million problem, and like that's going to hit our profile. That's going to like hit our radar. And if it's below a $10 million problem, maybe it doesn't hit our radar because in terms of like volume of loans, not volume of revenue, $10 million revenue would absolutely hit our radar. But $10 million of loans, like maybe it doesn't because it's not a big enough scale for the time invested. So you can help people have a big impact. And 10 million, that's 50 doctors basically who have come in through the door. And these are people who are like treating people, and one less thing they're worrying about is having to owe the government $600,000 because they've been in deferment for 3 years, instead of refinancing with SoFi, where they save money today. They lock in their interest rate at a very low place today, and then they have the freedom to go into private practice if they want to. They don't have to. They're not beholden to go into public service. So these are the kind of issues we work on at SoFi all the time. Like this, we use the residency program example here, but there's 10 other ones we could have done. And these are just some quick stats. I think these are probably a week old. Actually, maybe longer. So we've got $250 million loan volume so far. About 1,200 borrowers on app so far. This is a couple weeks old. But yeah, $44,000 is the average that a doctor's going to save with us based on the stats we've pulled, because they have high balances, so they can save more money. Like I said, a few of my friends have refinanced with this product. My friend Jake, who's one of my good buddies, like his wife was in residency at Brown. He had just finished his residency, and they both refinanced. Jake was in public practice, or did, but his wife was going to private practice. She refinanced with us, saved a ton of money. And then we've already expanded to dentists, and then lawyers. We mentioned you go to a clerkship out of law school. It's the exact same thing. You can work for the Supreme Court. You're making $65,000 a year. Even if you're going to go work for Skadden, which is a big fancy law firm, afterwards you're making a lot of money, but you're only making a little bit at a time. So we're going to design a program where you're most likely anyway, we'll be able to go back and do to refinance the same thing. So this is like a cool example. This is a project near and dear to me. But there's 10 other ones we could have shown tonight that I think could have been as impactful. Like $250 million is a lot of money for us. Like that's about, I guess now probably shouldn't say this, but it's a little over 5% of how much we do in student loans today. And so it's a big part of our business and growing very quickly, because there's a huge need for by these borrowers for this product. And it's a way, we designed it with the customer first, so we can make sure that we're going to meet all of their needs. I think that's all. Okay, so cool. So I'm the last one, thank God, right? We've been here for a long time. So everyone from SoFi is still here. We're going to stick around for questions at the end. I think Rex is going to wrap this up, but we'll all be around. So like I said, if you have any questions about the product team, engineering team, or the strategy side, like come find us, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.